For all things great iron and hard top, it's Kevlu and Seasons of Sandbox.
Since the Sandbox fans, what is going on? Welcome back to our second annual Fantasy Football Awards. We're here to recognize everyone that was great and sucked this year in fantasy football. In the episodes, we're going to start the Fantasy Football Awards with the Waiver Wire Pick Up of the year. So, Kev, I want to hear yours before I get into mine. I wanted to make this pick on somebody that I actually was able to pick up through the season.
I did the
Just
same
think
thing.
it makes sense. I don't want to toss out somebody that I don't have.
Again, this is a guy that I picked up, and it's probably not a name that most people will have for any fantasy football award, but it is a tight end, and given, the lack of depth at tight end this year, obviously Waller getting hurt, Andrews was out for a little bit, and just not really that many great tight ends. I'm going to go with Pat Freiermuth.
Okay.
That's a guy I picked up off waiver wire because, I was a Darren Waller owner to start the season, and obviously Waller made a quick exit out of the season. And this is a guy that, I haven't not started besides when he was on the bye. And, yeah, he does have some weeks where he puts up duds, but he's had a ton of weeks where he's put up 7, 8 plus, and, off a waiver wire tight end.
That's above average.
That's above average.
Yeah.
I mean, that's more than a lot of, the Kyle Pitts of the world that people drafted high, you know what I mean? So I think I got to go with Pat Freiermuth. Again, this is waiver wire, so take it for what it is, but that's my waiver wire player of the year.
No, that's not bad. I definitely have somebody that I feel like has made a little bit more of an impact, on my team and, for their team. But I got Rhamondre Stevenson, and this was, a 10-person league, and he's just been balling. One. Yeah, I got him week 6.
It's tough because he got drafted in most of my leagues. That's why. But
yeah.
Yeah.
He wasn't available or shouldn't have been available in most leagues. I got that in the Lockhead Family League, and he's put up 10
Come on,
points.
Lockhead family. What are we doing?
He's put up 10 points in every single game or above since week 2. So, I mean, that's just consistent production. So, shout out Rhamondre Stevenson. That was a huge pick for me. I got ETN in that league. He's been balling. I got Pollard in that league. He's been balling. So, my running backs have been eating. So, we'll see if, I can finish out the season strong. Now I'm going to go to the biggest bust. And this one can be, all over the place. Interested to hear, what you have, Kevin. I don't have a bust that I actually drafted. Luckily, thank God.
Me neither.
And
thank God.
There's some guys that you could obviously argue, especially with the way some of my fantasy seasons went. But wanted to hear your biggest bust first.
Even last year when I gave this award, I tried to shy away from people that were injured because obviously they're the biggest bust when push comes to shove. And honestly, I might get torched for this, but I'm gonna go ahead and say Jonathan Taylor.
Okay.
I mean, this is someone. Yeah, it's still Jonathan Taylor. He's still a good running back, but for where he was going in drafts, I mean, I can't imagine he went anywhere lower than 2 or 3 in anyone's draft across the entire globe.
And he didn't put up.
He just didn't put up the numbers. Again, did he have some Jonathan Taylor-esque weeks? Yes, but again, when you're talking about that number 1 or 2 pick overall in a draft, you're expecting a guy to play a lot better than he did this year. And obviously there's a lot of factors that go into the Colts stunk or whatever, but we're talking about fantasy relevance, and I just feel like he was the biggest bust on the year.
No, I feel you. There were 2 guys here that I wanted to recognize, and I feel like, there's some part of it that's actually due to injury, right? But outside of that, in their opportunities, yeah, we've seen flashes, but this isn't just something that we've seen this year. This is something that we've seen, continuously.
Yeah.
The first one I'm going to go to is Darren Waller.
Yeah.
His ADP, when draft time was around, was right at 49.
I think he was my biggest bust last year, if I recall. We'll have to dig into the archives. But.
Yeah, and arguably, that was someone that was on your team, so could fit
definitely.
the mold, But, I just think he hasn't been available, if you want me to be honest. In the past 2 years, he's missed 17 games.
Yeah.
He has 3 touchdowns in 2 years. And in that span, he only has 2 games over 100 yards.
Yeah, unacceptable.
So, just feel like, that's someone you might want to fade a little bit more. And call me crazy because I know we've seen, greatness from this guy, recently. But DeAndre Swift, this is someone that was getting drafted at the back end of first round. His ADP in drafts was 14.5. You get your opportunities taken, and Jamal Williams is obviously producing, but it's playoff time, and you can't even start DeAndre Swift with confidence, and that's problematic. He hasn't played more than 13 games in a season, so he's not going to give you 16, 17 games. And, 3 years in the league, he's only combined for 1,500 rushing yards.
Yeah.
And I get it, he was a rookie at one point in time, you know what I mean? But going on to, the next category, we have the player I was right about. And I feel like this is always a category that, you want to brag a little bit, right? And whether it was someone that was, doing great or someone that sucked and you could just tell that they sucked, right? A player that I was right about, James Conner.
Mm-hmm.
I just think he had a horrible season, especially for, where he was getting drafted. This is a guy that was getting selected, within the top 30, of overall picks. So he definitely didn't give you the production like that. You might have got some better weeks from, Benjamin, when he gave you, the 3-4 starts in the middle of the season. But last night, versus the Pats, he obviously had a good game, but it's week 14 and you're getting a good game now, you know what I mean? So got to keep that in mind. That's one player I was right about. Kev, I got another one, but I want to hear yours.
Again, I was trying to figure out which direction to go because it was someone I was right about being bad or someone I was right about being good. I decided to go with good. And I'm going to go ahead and say Josh Jacobs. I said at the beginning of the season, getting Devontae, no matter what the relevance was with Devontae's role, just having a guy like that on the outside that needs to be contained and needs to be covered just opens up the field. I mean, we've seen it with, again, not to compare these two guys, but even like a Devin Singletary, right? Like Devin Singletary statistically having the best year of his career because teams finally have to open up their defenses to cover the Stephon Diggs, to cover the, the Gabe Davises. So when you have someone like that on the outside, it just opens up the field and just makes a guy like Josh Jacobs' job even easier. And then obviously, Derek Carr hasn't been playing great, so they've been forced to run the ball and things like that. But, yeah, I mean, Josh Jacobs, I think he might be 1 right now or 2. I know he's definitely 2 or 3 position rank in fantasy, which I can't say I was that right. I don't think I projected that high, but I was right nonetheless.
Josh Jacobs' name is definitely going to come up somewhere on my list today, so you don't know what category it's going to be in. But the other guy on my list that I was right about is someone that didn't have a good year, and that was Kyle Pitts. Marcus Mariota hasn't produced a relevant pass catcher in years. It just wasn't the case. And yeah, Kyle Pitts is extremely talented, but they struggled to get him the ball. When you heard what the offensive scheme was, it wasn't to get Kyle Pitts the ball 10 games, and that's just what it was. So. That was a little disappointing, but I would definitely say, James Conner and Kyle Pitts were 2 guys I was right about in the offseason. All right, jumping back in, a player that I was wrong about. Kev, I can't wait to hear the player that you were wrong about. I'm going to come in with one, and I don't want to say I talked a lot of trash, but I needed to see more to be able to believe it. And, that's with the Eagles and the Dolphins. Kev, I'm sure you remember that talk from the offseason, but yeah, Tua to start off the list. I definitely didn't think he was going to be able to produce 2 fantasy relevant wide receivers. Never mind an arguable offensive player of the year in Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waller, who in a sophomore season or 3rd year in the NFL, I mean, is starting to make a tremendous impact and can really see himself being a number 1 on another team. And this is with not a great backfield, and Gesicki's a solid tight end, but he doesn't fit what they do.
Right.
The defense isn't anything great. So the fact of the matter that, they made the turnaround this quick and shown their potential is definitely strong. But, maybe you were right. Maybe Buffalo will be able to outlast Miami to win that division after all.
Hopefully, big showdown Saturday night.
I know. You're gonna be in New York watching the game.
Me and Zoe are going to a bar to watch it. So
okay.
I'll be watching it.
That was one of the players that I was wrong about. Yeah, let me hit one of yours.
Yeah, so mine, and unfortunately I am an owner for this guy. Again, this isn't a huge name in the NFL, but someone I definitely, was expecting going into the season, to be a top 10, 12, player at their position. That's Michael Pittman.
Yeah.
And he started his first couple weeks, I think he put up like 17 and 19, and then after that, he's struggling to catch 4 or 5 balls a game. Again, I know, you had the injury to Matt Ryan. You have Jonathan Taylor not playing well, but this was a guy that I drafted expecting him to be a wide receiver 2 or even like a 1B, because I think I have him on the same team as – actually, no, I drafted him as my number 1 because I drafted him and Waddle. I expected Waddle to be my number 2. But Waddle ended up being the number 1. But, yeah, Michael Pittman, I mean, this is a guy that towards the end of the year, I wasn't even starting. You know what I mean? Which is crazy to say, but yeah, I feel like he's probably the player I was wrong about. I definitely thought he was going to be, flirting with that top 10, and even some weeks given matchups like a top 5 matchup for fantasy, but it just didn't pan out.
Yeah, like especially where we saw that last year. I mean, it's definitely fair to have those expectations.
Plus, I'm like, you got the better quarterback, a quarterback that likes to throw. You know what I mean? Like Matt Ryan's notorious for, a pass first. Exactly. Yeah. So expect it to work out, but it didn't.
Another player that I was wrong about, and I mean, like, this dude is seriously going to be recognized, as an arguable top 5 wide receiver in the NFL right now, and this is A.J. Brown.
Yeah.
Obviously, he has an MVP candidate in Jalen Hurts throwing to him, right? Like, that's obvious. The plays he's making, the catches, the one-hand grabs, the amount of touchdowns that they're scoring, the 1, 2, 3 touchdowns, like, in a game, the impact those wide receivers have on that offense makes the Eagles as good as they are, if you want me to be honest.
Yeah.
Miles Sanders has been consistent all year, but without those deep threats and those big play abilities, it would be really hard for that offense to score like that and be sustainable. So that's why the Eagles are as good as they are, and that's definitely a player that I was wrong about. I mean, he's being drafted around the 30 spot in most fantasy drafts, and that's kind of a steal for the player that you got out of A.J. Brown.
Yeah, definitely.
Let's go to some underperformers, Kev. This list can be, wild wherever it went, and this is a list that I definitely didn't want to pick someone that was dealing with injuries like that, because this is someone that I feel like just played and just hasn't been the same. 2 people on this list, I have both of them in a couple of different leagues. My first one, Deontay Johnson. Deontay Johnson was a keeper in one of my leagues, a 5th-round keeper. I was like, Kenny Pickett's coming in. It could only be better than Big Ben's last year, and it wasn't. It flat out wasn't. I was in consideration to keeping Najee. I had him in a couple of leagues, and he was a person that you could also have in this category. But that was more of a team problem, I feel like, because we still see a couple of games here and there from Najee Harris. But Deontay Johnson, his ADP was 48, and this is someone that could have been on the waiver wire all year, if you want me to be honest. He never caught 100 yards this season. He has 0 touchdowns on the year.
Yeah, that's
absolutely underperformed.
Yeah, so I'm actually glad that you brought Najee Harris up, because that was my underperformer of the year.
Okay. Don't hate
And I feel like even more so because of the quarterback situation. You had Trubisky as the starter to start the season. Then Pickens comes in, so you don't really know what to expect. And when you have a guy like Najee, you expect them to feed him, and you expect him to get the red zone touches and, at least 4 or 5 touchdowns on the year, just given the volume. But again, I mean, I agree. It's definitely more of just a team thing. I think that team is a lot more set back than they thought they were, not having Big Ben. But again, this was a guy that was going mid to late first round. You know what I mean? A lot of people might have drafted him as their number 1 running back, and he just hasn't performed like that.
Another underperformer I have, and this one can obviously be debatable, but I definitely, when you draft guys like Najee and you draft guys like Alvin Kamara, they have expectations, especially where you grab them. And Kamara was somebody that was being grabbed right around that 15 spot, and he had, 1 week where he had, 30-plus points. He had another week that was above 20-plus points. So it happened twice this season. But, the past couple, I want to say 5 weeks, this dude hasn't put up 10 points. It's the fantasy playoffs guy. What are we doing? We need those points, Alvin Kamara. Come on. And obviously, that's not solely his fault. That offense is a different, unity altogether. And that team is kind of underperforming, but you definitely would still expect, fantasy points and bulk touchdowns, when they're lacking talent in other places, Going to the next category, the overperformer. Interested to hear this one, but mine, someone that I have in a couple of leagues, I traded away in a league, and I'm definitely regretting it at this point, but Tony Pollard, man. This dude was getting drafted, like, around the 8th round. 86th overall. Absolutely crazy, and wherever he was selected, he's surpassing expectations. This dude's a top 10 fantasy running back, and he wasn't even, the starter for 4 weeks of the season. So that just goes to show you how much he's really scoring, but he catches the ball great. He runs the ball inside and outside the tackles, with great precision. So Tony Pollard is going to be a league winner for some people.
I have Tony Pollard for a similar award. For this one, I got Tua. I do. I have Tua. I think,
definitely.
We've definitely seen Tua grow as a quarterback. But I'm also still very skeptical of what the future looks like for Tua in the NFL. Obviously, when you're throwing to Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, it makes your job a whole lot easier. And obviously, I'm assuming the Dolphins are going to, try to lock those guys up for as long as they can. But I think just even some of the throws, you know what I mean? Like some of the throws that, if Tyreek Hill wasn't there, probably would be interceptions, you know what I mean? Just because of how Tyreek maneuvers and how he undercuts, the cornerbacks and the safeties. So I think Tua definitely is an overperformer. I didn't want to say that he was a one-year wonder because I do think that he will, continue to play good. I just don't know if he'll be putting up, north of 25 fantasy points every single week like he's been doing. No. Plus, he's still, people forget he's one more hot hit from, being in a
on
wheelchair.
The sideline. So. Yeah. No, absolutely. Kev, this one's one of my favorite ones that we do in this entire award show. But before we get to it, guys, go and leave a 5-star review. You can do that on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, or sandbox.net. But you don't know too many podcasts that put together award shows like we do, that put together the fantasy content like we do.
That's a fact.
Go and show some love and tell us why you like the show. The 1-year wonders. I remember mine last year, and I'm so happy that it came to fruition this year. My last year 1-year wonder was James Conner, and it's definitely showing. This year, my 1-year wonder, I got mad love, mad respect for this guy, but you have to just consider it in a fantasy perspective. And it is what it is. Jamal Williams is my 1-year wonder. Let's be real. I mean, 14 rushing touchdowns, and it's still 3 weeks in the season. That's a lot of touchdowns for a backup running back. I know that they like to run the ball, but even if this is the case, I definitely expect them to add a running back with DeAndre Swift's injury, history and things like that. But this dude is going to win people some leagues. His average draft spot was 171. So, I mean, this is somebody that could have not even been drafted in most fantasy leagues, if you want me to be honest. Definitely think that Jamal Williams won't be a 14-plus rushing touchdown player in the NFL again, and that's no disrespect, but it is what it is.
Yeah, no, I agree. And honestly, a lot of people might be mad at this one, but again, I said I had this guy in a similar award, and this is where I got Tony Pollard. And Tony Pollard he's a good running back, and I think especially last year we started seeing it in spurts here and there, and we were like, what can this guy really do? And obviously this year he's absolutely exploded. But at the same time, it is tough. We don't know what's going to happen with Zeke in the offseason. Him and the Cowboys going to part ways, you know what I mean? And if they do, as good as Tony Pollard's been with the amount of volume he's had, it just puts even more pressure on you when you're the declared, and people can say, yeah, maybe he's the number one there now. He could be. I would be open to that argument. But, when you have a guy like Zeke, if they are to part ways with him, that just puts even more pressure on Tony Pollard. You know what I mean? And can he, really be that guy going forward for years to come? You know what I mean? I think a lot of people are starting to get used to, Tony Pollard having, 20, 25, 30-plus points and carries on the game, and I just think that's an unrealistic, volume for them, and especially for the Cowboys. I mean, the Cowboys themselves could be a 1-year wonder this year. You know what I'm saying? We know how that organization goes, but
kept calling out the Cowboys.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is, but I mean, I think Tony Pollard, I'm not going to say, don't draft him or don't draft him high or anything like that, but just be skeptical. You know what I mean? Just be skeptical. This is a guy who ceased his opportunity. You know what I mean? Yeah. But when that opportunity's gone, when he's the man, will he be able to keep it together? Maybe he will. Maybe he won't. I don't think so. I think he'll still be a fantasy-relevant running back, but I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to go out and win you a league like he's doing for a lot of guys this year.
Yeah. No, I hear that. And I believe in Tony Pollard, but I know that it's going to be interesting. Is he going to be with Dallas after this year? Is he going to go somewhere else? What's his role going to be? The rising stars. I try and pick, young guys. I forget who I said last year for my rising star, honestly. But this year I have 2 rookies on my rising star list, and one of them isn't playing at the moment, and the other one, we're seeing, his prime development happen right in front of our eyes. The first one is going to be Christian Watson. Look, this dude started off the year slow. He had a couple of drops. He was learning the system, but sometimes that's what happens when it comes to becoming a pro. But look at the relationship, he's really established with one of the best quarterbacks in the league in Aaron Rodgers, at least respected as such. You might not consider him one right now, but at least respected as such. Since week 10, this dude has 27 targets and 7 touchdowns. 7 of 27 catches are legit touchdowns. That's crazy. And this is just the beginning. Obviously, a lot of his productions happened since week 10, but definitely think, we can continue to see that going forward, as the Packers have had so much success with young wide receivers. My next one, this guy is no longer playing this year. Breece Hall. This dude was a bull, was an absolute bull. He had 103 fantasy points in 5 weeks, and he had 4 touchdowns in every single 4 of his last games before he got hurt. Like, this dude was about to be an RB1, solidified on the Jets. Like, the Jets were legit relevant. They still are. I mean, this is a team that's favored to have a playoff spot at the moment, right? But it's going to be interesting to see the way it works out for Breece Hall and he comes back from the injury. But I honestly feel like he got hurt early enough in the season where he can make a full recovery. And maybe by week 4 next year, he's back to close to 100% or whatever top potential he'll be recovered from an ACL injury.
Again, this is always a tough award because it's like, do you pick a rookie? Do you pick young guys? Do you pick someone who might be on the older side but is just trying to get their things together? But
did you go Geno Smith?
No, I didn't. But this is a guy that I feel like, unless you're a fan of this team or unless you really watched their games, from opening kickoff to last play, you don't really hear much about. But, and Steve, we've had multiple conversations about this guy, and this is where my bias is going to kick in. But I got James Cook as a rising star.
Okay.
I mean, especially, compared to a lot of the young running backs, like he has, I feel like, the easiest route to becoming a number 1 running back just because, they do have Devin Singletary, who's having a good year, but, it's still Devin Singletary.
I feel like they're about to open it up for Cook.
I think so, too. And listen, Buffalo's been one of those teams that literally until, dating back to the C.J. Spiller days, they never really had, like, a set number 1 running back.
Man.
Yeah, Fred Jackson, the C.J. Spiller.
McCoy.
Yeah, and you're talking, early mid 2010. So it's been a long time coming since, the Bills had a set in stone depth chart number 1 running back. And I feel like, especially as the weeks go on, Steve, we've talked about it, his volume's just getting higher and higher. They're using him in the pass game. They're using him in the run game. They're using them all sorts of ways. So watch out for James Cook. In the next couple of years, I guarantee you he'll be, a top 10, 15 running back taken in the draft.
Yeah, I wish this dude kind of got more opportunities earlier because I really feel like James Cook could have ate it up a little bit more and added a dimension to the team that maybe would have took away hits from Josh Allen. Yeah. That's the goal there, right? And if you want to have a committee, that's fine. But I still think you can have someone that gets the ball more than Singletary that's more talented, plain and simple. And James Cook is.
Yeah.
Plain and simple. A couple awards left. This is a player I think we were both hampered by, but I don't know if we're going to have the same name here. The most annoying player of the year for our fantasy football awards. This is someone I had to deal with. Keenan Allen.
Yep, I also had to deal with him.
Oh, my God. I drafted this dude. He was my 3rd pick in my fantasy draft. And for 10 weeks, we had no idea when this dude was coming in. He played week 1, out, injured. Hamstring injury, you'd think 3-4 weeks, and then he tweaks it again. And then he comes back and he tweaks it again. And then they go to bye, and it's oh, shit, it's week 10. He's playing great now. That's good. It's nice to have him for the fantasy playoffs. But, dude, I needed you, man. I could have got some high scores. We want to get this money, right? That's what fantasy football is all about. Keenan Allen, mad respect for you. One of the best route runners in the league. But by far, my most annoying fantasy football player of the year.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, that's a guy I drafted as my wide receiver. I don't have Keenan. As mine. But I agree. But again, it's hard. It's hard because I try to shy away from injuries. But you're right because, it should have only been a 3-4 injury. I also don't think the Chargers handled that all correct because hamstring, one of those injuries, you can't rush a guy back because it's so easy. Probably the easiest injury to re-injure. Exactly, especially as a wide receiver. I have 2 guys. both tight ends, and I feel like, I talked about the lack of depth at the tight end position this season for fantasy, and I feel like these two are part of the reason why there was such, a lack of depth. Kyle Pitts is my first.
Okay, here for it.
And Dawson Knox is my second.
Wow, Dawson Knox.
And, I feel like, again, these are two guys that I can't imagine weren't picked top 8 for their position in the draft. You know what I mean? Kyle Pitts probably top 4 or 5. Dawson Knox probably 7 or 8 after, the Kittles and the Andrews and guys like that. But, Dawson Knox went from literally being our number 2 target last year as far as, actual targets to a 5-game – there was a 5-game streak.
He didn't have a catch.
He didn't have a target. He didn't even have a target in 5 games. Again, that's not all on him, obviously. That's on the quarterback. That's on the offensive coordinator.
But, he can produce.
Exactly. He can produce, and you know what he's capable of when he has, the opportunity. And the same thing with Kyle Pitts. I mean, again, it's not on him. The Falcons aren't great. But, again, this is a guy who is arguably the most skilled player on his offense. You know what I mean? Besides maybe Cordell Patterson, because he can really do a little bit of everything. But this is a guy that I know in my drafts, some people picked him over Kittle, not even joking, just because of, Kittle's injury past. So, and again, I feel like both of these guys are guys that, because of the lack of position, it's like you don't want to start them, but you really don't have a choice, because what are you going to go pick up, a Greg Dulcich off a waiver wire and start him over Kyle Pitts, because you know that Kyle Pitts can have a week where he puts up 20, but it just never happens. You know what I mean? But the upside for both of them is just the risk of not playing them is higher than the reward. You know what I mean? So it's tough.
We
love that.
We got to hold the tight ends accountable. You have to. 2 awards left. Rookie of the Year is our first.
And we're unanimous on this one.
Are we?
We are.
So let's say it together. Our Rookie of the Year this year, 2022, is
Kenneth Walker.
Kenneth Walker, 140 fantasy points at the running back position. He'll probably finish, around that
and that's
top
with
15.
missing 3-4 games.
140
fantasy points.
He didn't start the season for them. He had a couple of nicks and crannies, throughout the season. But Kenneth Walker, he's definitely going to be, their running back of the future. And you could have went in a lot of directions with this, right? You got the Olaves, you got the Garrett Wilsons, and, Pierce could have got this award too. But I just think that, Walker, was the most consistent. I think he was the biggest threat, when it came down to it. And, Seattle was supposed to be one of the worst football teams this year. They have one of the best offenses. They had good rookies on defense that are making plays, and they made it happen. So that's why, got to show love to Kenneth Walker here. Coming over to the MVPs, the most valuable fantasy football player of the year. Last year, I want to say that it was probably Cooper Kupp with the season that he had. This year, definitely didn't have this guy on my favorite list, throughout the season or fantasy rankings or anything like that. But I have to, take back, my placing for him because I was wrong. Josh Jacobs is my most valuable player on the list. Yeah, I'm sure you weren't expecting that.
Love that.
But at this point in the season, 260 fantasy points, 140-plus point performance, 230-plus point performances. And this dude was drafted 50th overall, the 5th round. To get that performance, absolutely crazy. Josh Jacobs, and all of that happens after week 3. So we're talking about some serious production. I don't know what changed in that offense, but Josh Jacobs is my fantasy football MVP.
All right, I think you're going to be a fan of my fantasy football MVP. Now, there was a lot of guys in contention. Obviously, Jalen Hurts is the first one that comes to mind, but I try to shy away from quarterbacks because the quarterbacks, statistically usually do put up the most points in fantasy.
You get the real MVP. Yeah.
Exactly. You can take, take the real MVP. We don't want that. We only care about fantasy
football. Yeah.
I got Saquon as my MVP.
Hey,
I do. And honestly, this is a guy that, if there was a comeback player of the year fantasy award, he probably would have got that too.
Yeah.
Probably could have been in the overperforming one too, just because of all the injuries he's had in the past. But I have Saquon as mine. I mean, again, he's a guy that people were very skeptical about drafting. Where do I draft him? Do I draft him late first? Do I draft him early second? Do I wait till the third? Do I see if he drops to the fourth? So his fantasy season this year was very unknown. But if you drafted this guy,
You were very pleased with your
Yeah.
results. And it
Can't
was
complain.
definitely a value.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Saquon
And
Barkley.
this is a guy that most people drafted as like their running back too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Nah, absolutely.
If they were smart. So.
Love that out of you, Kev.
Yeah.
I love that out of you.
Yeah.
I know you realistically could have gotten McCaffrey and Saquon on the same team this year.
Yeah.
And it would have been really difficult for Saquon to fall that far, but I'm
Yeah.
sure it's happened in some leagues.
Mm-hmm.
Since the Sandbox fans, this is our second annual Fantasy Football Award Show. Sad that the fantasy football season is wrapping up, but that means NFL playoffs and the Super Bowl was just that much closer. Make sure to check out our Week 15 Fantasy Football Rankings and the rest of our content that comes to you on Apple, Spotify, and our website, sensesandbox.net. Get some new merch, donate some toys. Peace out. 5 stars.
For all things great iron and hard top, it's Kev Lewis Decent, a Sandbox.